Hey everyone, welcome back to Papa's Workshop. Today I want to talk about what happens when you have a problem with your resin pour. Let's face it, all of the resin pours that you do for these different inlays are not going to be perfect. And sometimes when you have a mistake, you have to find out, one, what caused the mistake and how to fix it. And today I want to talk about that and show you what I did to fix this chessboard that I recently poured. Yes, I did have a problem with that pour, and I want to show you what the problem was and how I fixed it. One of the things I want to do is come back and look at this chessboard again, because after I poured it, there were some little divots here where the epoxy had literally soaked all the way through. So now you have to be able to determine what causes that. Now, if you'll notice, all of these are along the edge of the black squares. So what actually causes the little divots that create those imperfections in your pour? Well, in my case, on these little squares, when these were printed, this was actually laminated. And right here, there is a seam all the way around. And in some cases, now this one looks really good, but in some cases, this seam did not seal tight enough and allow the epoxy to be able to slip through it. And it went all the way through and out the bottom. Now there's other causes that will create these little divots in your project. One of them, if you're working with the wood and there's trapped air and that little bubble pops and all of a sudden it has a hole in there and that epoxy is allowed to seep through. So those types of little imperfections you have to be aware of. To be able to fix this, it's really a fairly easy fix. Now what I did is mixed up just a little bit of the epoxy and sealed the hole. And you can see how that now is actually raised up a little bit. And this long one right here, where the epoxy was seeping through, is now overfilled, and that seals the hole. And again, there was one here. So now that this is completely dry, I can actually sand this and put another top coat on top of this, and that should be just like the rest of the board. So it's a little minor inconvenience, but all in all, it's a good lesson learned. I'm going to lightly sand this with the 220 grit and make sure that all of this is down flush. And all I'm really doing is dulling the surface just a little bit so that it creates something for this clear coat to be able to bite onto. And I also want to make sure that these areas that where I overfilled it is now back down level. So that will require just a little bit more of the sanding. This will help to create a good bond between the new epoxy and the old top coat epoxy. And this does not take long to do. This over here looks real good. I'm going to do a little bit more to this, so that's still standing just a little bit proud. Now we'll get this cleaned up and we'll be able to put a top coat on it. Now I want to clean this off with the alcohol, and you can begin to see what it's going to look like with this next coat on it. Now before you put this final clear coat on, you want to make sure again it's completely clean, and you want to make sure that it's dry. You don't want any alcohol that has not completely dried. So I've gone through now and completely cleaned everything, the edges. I also have it raised up on a piece of plywood to be able to keep it off the table. I'm gonna let this dry now. I'm gonna look it over one more time to make sure that there's no residue on this and set up to pour some epoxy. Now for these projects today, I wanna put the tape around the edges and that way the epoxy will be able to flow into this area self-level, and after about 30 minutes, then I'll pull this tape off and let it go down the sides. Now this creates just a little bit of a trough, and that way as this sets up, that epoxy will just continue to flow over and it will begin to set up at that point. So this portion will remain constant. Now, another real big problem that people have is with surface tension. It sounds crazy, but that can cause a problem. Have you ever seen water roll down your windshield and it kind of goes in all different directions? It doesn't go straight down. Well, it's taking the path of the least resistance, and that's surface tension is preventing it from going into those other places. Well, guess what? The resin does the exact same thing. When you pour out the resin on your project, it takes the path of least resistance. Even though it's self-leveling, there are times when there's a little gap in there that didn't get the resin. You have to be able to take care of that. And that surface tension is not allowing that resin to flow. It happens on the surface of the material, and it can also happen on the edges when that epoxy starts to flow over the edges and you haven't been able to get it to flow smoothly. It's going to have these long drips. Well, there's surface tension there that's preventing it from giving you that smooth edge. It's another factor that you need to be able to take care of. Another real big topic that I want to talk about is how much resin do you mix. That is very, very important to be able to figure out as close as you possibly can. Guesswork is not an option. Epoxy, quite frankly, costs too much and you don't want to waste it. It's a very simple formula that I think deserves to be replayed here again. Now, I've shown this before. I had this in the previous video, and I'm going to add this clip into this video as well. Also, if you're going to figure the volume based on filling the entire surface, if you have a large inlay, I have videos where I've shown you the formulas on exactly how to do that. I'll put a link in the description below to that video. But please, don't just guess on how much resin that you need, because invariably you're going to have two problems. One, you're going to have too much resin and you're just going to waste it. Or two, you're going to have not enough. Now, if it's clear, not necessarily a big thing. But if you mix a color into it, to be able to try to duplicate that color is next to impossible. So you want to be able to have enough resin. Quite frankly, you want to have the right amount of resin. And to do that, you got to calculate it. So let's go through this step-by-step process on how to figure out exactly how much resin that you need. One other point that I want to mention to you. People have asked, well, how do you know how much to mix per square foot? Well, the manufacturer will tell you that, but a good rule of thumb is 3 ounces per square foot. That has served me very, very well for a number of years. And that's what I'm using in this video also. So let's go ahead and replay that segment for you. So the two projects that we're working on today, one of them is 5.75 by the 20.75 inches. When you multiply that out, that is going to be 119.3 inches. The other project, the chessboard, is 20 by 20, and that's going to be 400 inches. We add that together, we're going to get the total number of square inches that we need. So it's 519. It takes 3 ounces now per square foot. Well, how many square inches are there in 1 square foot? 144. So all we need to do is divide our 519.3, and we're dividing that by the 144. 3.6 square feet. So we're going to need a total of 10.8 ounces to be able to do this project. And that way we're not going to have very much waste at all. And that's the key thing. Remember, the epoxy is rather expensive and you don't want to waste it. So we're going to mix up 11 ounces of the epoxy for pouring these two projects. Okay, I hope that was really helpful for you. But now let me talk about mixing the resin. I have 2 small cups here, and it has the ounces listed on the sides. Now, we know that we're going to be making 11 ounces, and because this is a 1-to-1 ratio, we're going to be mixing 5.5 ounces of each part A and part B. Once you have the right quantity, then pour it into the larger cup and mix thoroughly. You want to be able to mix this for at least 2 minutes and scrape the sides often. That is very, very important. But you can see here where I'm pouring the part A into the resin cup, and then I'm pouring part B, which is a hardener, into the other cup, and you want to be able to get those even. This is 1-to-1 ratio by volume. You want this as accurate as you possibly can. Once you have completed getting the ratio correctly and poured the proper amount, then pour these into your larger cup to actually mix them. And scrape the sides well, get all of the resin out. Now this may seem just common sense, but one of the problems that people have is where the resin does not harden properly. Well, this can be a problem. If you don't scrape out all the resin and you get more out of one cup than the other cup, you don't have the 1-to-1 ratio again, and it could cause a problem in how the resin actually hardens or does not harden. So please take these simple steps very seriously and don't skip them. Follow these simple instructions, and that will help prepare you for a much more successful pour. And please take your time, mix it according to the instructions. In my case, you have to mix this at least 2 minutes to be able to get a real good mix. Don't skip this part either. And then when you pour the resin, you have to be able to pour according to how much square footage you have for each project. Because I like to do multiple projects, I'll pour a little bit on the first project, then I'll come over and pour some more on the second project. Now, save some in your cup. Don't pour it all out. As you're spreading it, you're going to find out if you have enough epoxy or if you need to add some more. If you need to add some more, it's real simple. Just grab the cup, because you still have epoxy in it, and you can pour out some more. You want to bring this epoxy where it's all the way up to the edges, and you want to make sure that you have good coverage throughout the entire project. You notice how I'm moving my hand and not missing any of the areas, because surprisingly enough, you're going to have that surface tension that I talked about earlier, and you're going to have a big hole right in the middle of your project where the epoxy did not flow. So the reason for using the hand to spread it like this is to be able to break that surface tension, to be able to make sure that you have epoxy covering the entire area. As I was spreading it out, I needed an extra amount of epoxy to be able to cover this edge. If I didn't have the extra in the cup, it would be a lot harder to be able to get the necessary epoxy where I need it. Also, if you look closely at the Starbond sign, you'll notice that the epoxy is not flowing over to the edges. Along that bottom edge, there is surface tension there, preventing it from reaching that blue tape. So you have to be able to break that tension. The easiest way to do that is with your hands. Once you have all of that done, hit it with a torch or a heat gun. That will pop those bubbles, and that too will help prevent you from having a problem. Those bubbles are trapped in that epoxy resin. They need to be able to get out. Some of them will reach the surface, but as you put the heat on it from the torch or the heat gun, it will pop those bubbles, and that too will help give you a flawless, beautiful, smooth finish. Now after about 30-35 minutes, the resin actually is beginning to set up, so it's not going to flow as much as when you first pour it out onto the project. Now is the time to be able to remove that blue tape. You're going to have to help the resin get over to the edge and flow down. So again, you're going to find yourself in that surface tension category, and it's not going to want to necessarily flow evenly. As you can see, I'm using my hand just to rub along this edge. The resin is actually flowing over, but it's taking the path of least resistance, and it's not covering the entire edge. And that's why you use your hand to be able to rub right along the edge to break that tension and allow it to smoothly flow over the entire surface. I want you to look closely at this edge now and see how perfectly smooth it is. If I had not rubbed the edge with my hand, you would not get that smooth edge. It would look like the water rolling off of your windshield, and you would have streaks of the resin. Same thing is here. Along that edge now is perfectly smooth, just because I took my hand and just rubbed along that edge. Now I've already talked about what caused the problem with this chessboard, But what about other different types of projects? What do people most commonly use with these resin pours? Well, it's usually wood. And you can get bubbles, you can get all types of problems when you're pouring the resin if you don't properly seal the wood to begin with, because guess what? Air can get trapped into the wood, and then when you pour the resin in it, that air is trying to escape. If you don't get all the bubbles out with the torch, yeah, you can have a problem with the finish. Now I want to talk about something else too, because as I had mentioned, most people will pour the resin over the wood, and that works great. Or in my case, with this particular project, we poured the resin literally over another coat of the resin. But that's not the only thing that people do. You can use this resin, for an example, with paints. Now, a lot of people will also paint a project, let's say using acrylics, and do this on canvas and want to put the epoxy over it. Yeah, you can do that. But you have to remember the surface tension is going to be one of your worst enemies. The other thing, for the most part, you're not going to get a chemical reaction using the different epoxies. But if you are doing a project that you've never done before with an unusual type of material that you're trying to put the resin on, test it out first and make sure that you don't get a chemical reaction. It may cause a different look that you don't want, or something that just totally ruins the project. So it's always pays to be able to test out on a small sample first before you go to your big project. Resin itself is a lot of fun and it's easy to work with, but there are a few basic things that you need to be able to do to be successful. And hopefully in this short video, I've been able to show you a few of those tips that will help make it more successful in your shop. Because my goal is to be able to have you as successful as you possibly can. I would rather make the mistakes in my shop and be able to explain them and show you the right way to do it so that you don't have those problems in your shop. I want to thank everybody for watching this real quick video today, because I wanted to be able to show you that every project is not perfect and there's easy fixes for most of the problems that you're going to encounter when you're pouring the resins, whether it's just on a inlay type project or if it's on, for example, the chessboard where we're covering the whole thing. So I hope that you learned something today that you can use in your shop and help you get better results. So until next time, I look forward to seeing you real soon. Okay, bye-bye.